everybody. Welcome to Kingdom Podcast. We have a very exciting program for you today. I have Cusick with me. He is, I'm going to call him a January 6th survivor. So get ready. Here we go. Hey, Cusick, thanks for being on the program today. I'm excited for you to be here with us. You've got a very unique story. Your background is pretty incredible, too, and what you did in business. You're going to Rhema. You went to Rhema Bible College, and you and your wife now live in Tulsa. But we're here today to talk about J6 and what went on there with you. You have a very personal experience with that, and we want to dive into it. I believe we're going to help some people. My prayer today is that we stir a fire, a righteous fire in people's lives so that we'll start standing up instead of sitting down and moving forward instead of backing up, mainly the church. I know others will hear this through the podcast, and they're going to catch your heart, and they're going to really be ticked off by your story, what happened to you and your family, and what's even going on and continuing now. But I'm believing that the church, that should be the loudest voice in our nation, begins to catch what's going on too. So, hey, Cusick, tell us a little bit about you and your family and what's going on with you, and then we'll dive into the J6 thing.
Yeah, so I'm a husband. I have a wife with 3 kids. I've got a six-year-old, almost 7. I got a 4-year-old, and I got a 2-year-old, so almost 2 years apart, each one of them. Luckily, my third one was going to be our last, and he ended up being a boy, so I was thrilled with that. I was outnumbered, but, we're still actually outnumbered, but anyhow, at least I got somebody to partner with. But so I moved back out. I went to Rhema in 2012, graduated in 2014, spent about 7 or 8 years. Was going to go back. My dad's a pastor, 40-year pastor. He went to Rhema as well. My mom passed away in 2012, right before I went to Rhema. I decided, I always, I had everybody telling me you're called to ministry, and I was the one of my family that never wanted anything to do with that, because I kind of saw the backside of ministry, and I saw it's not what everybody thinks. It's not just standing up and preaching. It's a lot more to that. Saw getting my parents getting backstabbed, saw them spending most of their time in it, and didn't really want anything to do with it. But finally, I never left God, never wanted to, turn my back on him, but I was a toe the line guy. So anyway, long story short, I got back, got my heart right, and, came out to Bible college, and like I said, went back to Florida. My dad tried to help my dad out. Didn't work out, and long time I didn't want to not work out, but God had better things, better plans for me, and so we moved back out. But going from all of those things to going in just to talk about President Trump for a minute here. I followed him for some time. Back in 2012, I remember he came hot around about running for office when Mitt Romney was going to run, and I was like, please, 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 we need somebody like you, sir. And he decided not to last minute, and so come 2016, you see all this, the way things are coming about, and the fact that he one of the most evil people in the whole world's thinking about running for office. You could see that they had the whole thing set up for her to win. And, it's like, no, please, God, no. And so you see this man come down and, come into the political realm. And it was just like, how I've always said, I don't know how anybody can't be for somebody that's for freedom of speech, which also is freedom of religion, which allows us and you to be able to preach the gospel without being persecuted and prosecuted. Number one, that's the only way the gospel is going to get out, not only through our country, but throughout the world, but we're everybody's watching us. So anyway, and, so we had the time through 2016, he moved the embassy. He did everything he said he was going to do. Again, how does anybody not like somebody that this guy's not a politician? Most politicians do nothing they say they're going to do. In fact, they do the opposite.
Zero.
Yeah. So anyway, anyhow, we saw 2020 coming around, and you start with we saw what happened with COVID. We saw how they were starting to gear everything down to these mail-in elections. We saw that the only way they figured they could win this thing was that they could steal it. That's it. We don't have a chance if we don't steal it. And so everybody saw it. We saw what happened. They stopped counting the numbers, the graphs, all that. It went up. And, I've been in politics my whole life, and I lived in Israel for 3 years. My dad, we started a business there. And so, I've been in the political, I wouldn't say I'm in the realm of it because I'm not in politics, but I have paid attention to politics my whole life. And so you start to really see, and 2020 brought a lot of opened a lot of people's eyes as to what's been going on in our country for some time. And thank God we got somebody here that's blowing, it's funny, his name's Trump, but blowing the trumpet on, what's going on here, what's going on there and everywhere else. And so we saw they stole the election from them. So they announced they were going to have a Stop the Steal rally in D.C. So, of course, wanted to go. We didn't go to D.C. for any reason other than to go to the rally. We knew nothing about anything going on at the Capitol that day at all. I mean, I've heard other people's stories that say they heard there was a protest there. We didn't know that. So we flew into Baltimore. I believe it was on Tuesday. Before Wednesday was January 6th. And, we walked out and around. There was nothing open because, it was during COVID. And I mean, nothing open. And anyway, the streets were empty. The subway or the metro was completely empty. And, we walked out and around. We found they had a little event at Freedom Square the night before, I think it was. And we went there for a little bit, but it rained. And so it was like, we're not. So we went back to the hotel. We got up the next day, and it was something that was so encouraging. I can honestly say, and I always tell everybody this, I don't know if there was 1 million people. I don't know if it was hundreds of thousands. It was at least hundreds of thousands. I mean, I don't know if it was 1 million. I don't know. But I can tell you that being there that day, there was no pushing. There was no shoving. Everybody was just standing around, peaceful, calm, quiet, happy, all the paid. Even my dad said, this finally opens up. He makes me think there's hope for our country, that people care enough to just come up here to see President Trump in this rally. And so we actually even waited in the line to get all the way through Secret Service to the stage area where President Trump was. And so, during that speech, and it was probably about 10 minutes, 15 minutes in, I don't remember exactly, but he mentioned, after this, we're going to go down to the Capitol. And then he said, and I'm going to join you. And so we were like, okay, well, let's go. And he said to peacefully, protest our rights for what happened in the election. So anyway, we waited, and I'm telling you, we waited. I wanted to see President Trump turn on YMCA, do his, dance that he does, and all that. So we waited there all the way through him speaking, all the way to the end. And believe me, that day it was freezing cold and the wind was howling. And so no sunshine, it was dark. It is, yeah. So it was dark and all that. So anyway, we waited, and then we had to look around for about probably another half hour because one of the guys that we were with lost his bag. They had a pile of bags. This goes to show you how people were so trusting in that crowd that you couldn't take anything up to the stage area. So people, and I probably say it was about 5 feet tall, hundreds of bags where people just left them there, and then they would pick them up when they came out. I mean, they weren't in lockers or anything. Well, for whatever reason, there was some that looked like he didn't have anything valuable in it, but somebody got his bag, must have been by accident. And so finally he said, forget it. He didn't have anything but a water bottle or something else in there. And so we were like, okay. So then we walked down there, and by the time we got down there, it was about 2:30 or maybe a little later. I can't remember the exact time frame, but when we got down there, all you could see was just a sea of people standing all over Capitol grounds. We didn't see any police. We didn't see any police outside at that point. There was no barricades to tell you don't, be walking up here, nothing like that. We walked all the way up Capitol Hill, up against the Capitol. Now there were people climbing on the scaffolding and all, but you got fools, in my opinion, in every crowd. And I didn't do that and wasn't interested in doing that. So we walked up in and around the side of the building and walked. People were trying to climb the wall, and it's like, dude, there's steps. There's no reason for that. So we walked in and around, and we even saw police coming in and around, some of the, they weren't really riot police, but they were Capitol policemen, and people were yelling at them. And there's even a video of me saying, leave them alone. Like, they have nothing to do with any of this. And so, anyway, we stood up there for some time, and then I saw a door open, and it was on the west side, which I'm very familiar with now after going through trial and all that. But at the time, we were just on the Capitol. I'm not sure which side's which and which way is which. And so we saw people going in and out. And I tell everybody it was mothers, children. And yes, there were men and about every race, every color, everything you want to imagine that was there. And I kept seeing them going. I always say after the third or fourth grandmother walked in and out, and I'm like, maybe they're just letting people go. So I asked a young girl, probably, I don't know if she was 18 or something, and her father, what's going on inside there? Because I had to go to the bathroom too, and there was nothing out there. So they said, oh, they're just letting people walk around, just don't touch anything. And, there were policemen standing at the door. So we walked over to the door and we walked inside, and we saw the policemen. People were taking pictures with them. They were talking to them. Thank you for being here, most people would say. And Matter of fact, one of the other guys we were with, he said that. And so we went in, and I asked one of the police officers about, after a couple minutes of walking in, and people were just, all they were doing was walking. There was people chanting USA. There was people chanting whose house, our house. We didn't participate in any of that, but I mean, it is the people's house, and this is the USA. I mean, it's pretty crazy because some of the charges that they're charging people with is disorderly and disruptive conduct, which is chanting USA on Capitol grounds, which is unbelievable. But anyhow, but BLM and the Antifa could chant "pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon," and that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
So anyway, we walked in. I asked officer at one point, where the restroom was. He showed me it was like 50 to 60 people. I would, no joke, in line, and I'm like, I'm not doing this. So we walked a little bit further, asked which way we could go out. One of the officers said, "You come this way." Something inside me said, "Don't go that way." And I looked at the other guy I was with, and then there was a guy I don't even know, and they said, "Something about that seems like a trap." And I said, "Yeah, I feel the same way." So we turned around, we walked back out the front, same door that we came in, stood out there for another 20, 30 minutes. And like I said, people were just standing, talking, people were saying all kinds of things. And then at that point, they brought the police up there and started getting people off the scaffolding. And then at that point, even Donald Trump put out a tweet, I think it was 4:00 or something like that. Don't fight the police. They're there to help us, and go home. That your voices have been heard, that we don't need violence. And we were like, "Nah, you're right. We weren't there for violence. We didn't really see any of that anyway." Well, it wasn't until we got back to the hotel that night, all of a sudden we turn on the news and there's everything you see is insurrection. And we were like, where were we during all this stuff? Like what happened? And so, anyhow, then at that point, we went home. I think we were there we were there the day after, and we went out and around, and there's not much, like, you couldn't go anything. One of the guys we were with, he hadn't been around the area. So my dad we drove around the DC, and anyhow, ended up going home on Friday. Well, by the 20th of January, the other guy we were with, not my father, but his name's Dave, he got a visit from the FBI, showed up at his front door, asking him if he went, why he went, what he did, and he told him. I mean, he was just blatantly honest because he didn't do anything wrong. We didn't.
Let me insert a question right here. How did they find out who you were? How did they get your identities?
So it was only him at that time, but we didn't find out until trial that actually it was a friend of his son's that actually called the FBI on this guy. Called the FBI and told him, I don't know how he found out that he was there, but somehow that call went in the day after we were of January 6th. So it had to have been, he told his friend, and his friend they called the FBI. And from what we've ended up finding out, they actually got paid too, this guy and his girlfriend. And so, it's funny that everybody thought that was an anonymous thing, and they told us in trial it wasn't anonymous at all. They actually gave us the name. So that just goes to show you how the FBI could care less about the identity of anybody who's trying to turn in anybody.
Yeah.
And anyway, so that's how they got to him. And then he said at one point, I went with, who'd you go with? He said, I went with my pastor. Well, my dad was a pastor. He kind of just has a small Bible study now that he does. He's 75 and at his house. And so they said, well, what's his name? And Dave said, oh, I can't do that, because he started realizing like they're trying to get me to incriminate him for something that, and so and then his wife said, you guys need to leave. You don't have, you have a warrant? No, it's a voluntary interview. Well, from that moment on, they began to follow him. And then they followed him out to my dad's, and they began to follow my dad. And then at that point, somehow they got, in that time frame, they got his iCloud account. So then they got into his iCloud. They found a picture on there of me, my dad, and him standing in front of Trump Hotel, like the day before January 6th. We took a picture out there, and that's what got them to me. And so then they started following me around. And the only reason I know that is because come June 24th, 2021, they ended up showing up at my house, about 10 officers with AR-15s and or pistols, all drawn on me, my 3-year-old, my 1-year-old at the time, daughters, and my wife, and immediately put me in handcuffs, took me out, said, what, they start telling me, oh, this is my wife. Immediately, thankfully, started recording, put her phone on record and held it down by her side. And so she began to ask him, why are you here? And they said, oh, it's because of his involvement in January 6th. And my wife goes, well, what exactly did he do? Oh, we can't tell you about that right now, ma'am. And so anyway, they brought me over to the car and they showed me a picture of me, as we walked in. He said, "Is that you?" I said, "Yeah, well, obviously it's me." Yes. And so he says, "We want this beanie." I was wearing a Trump beanie and a North Face jacket that day. He said, "We want this beanie. We want this jacket." I said, "So if I give you that beanie, that jacket, you're not going to go ransack?" "Oh, no, sir. We're not here to do that." "Sir, listen, you see what this says right here?" And he pointed to the top of the page and it says the United States of America, Washington, D.C., District of Columbia. And he said, "We're just following orders." And I said, "Well, doesn't that sound all too familiar? Like we're just following orders. Sounds like Gestapo to me." So they took us over that day to Orlando and booked us, put us in, told us our charges. Originally, there was 3 misdemeanors. And then after that point, by the next arraignment, and they let us out that day.
Can you tell us the misdemeanors?
Yeah, that was violent entry into the Capitol building, entering and remaining in a restricted building, which by definition is that you were asked to leave, which we never were, and you stayed. Also, disruptive and disorderly conduct, which we didn't do. What that was, and then they added one by the first arraignment, which was parading and picketing, which anybody that has been arrested for January 6th has a parading and picketing. And matter of fact, those 4 misdemeanor charges have become like the main 4 charges that people that didn't do anything violent got and received. So anyhow, I had people, plea out, let this go. You don't want to deal with this. You're going to go to DC. It's going to be a certain way. They're going to be stacked against you. I can't plea out. I wouldn't even feel good about myself if I pled out because I didn't do any of this stuff. It's like if you go into a gas station and walk out with what you bought and they said you stole it. No, I didn't. I paid for it. So anyway, we took it all the way through. We went through a 2-year court battle and where they even consolidated us into one case. We originally had Judge Sullivan, who was the judge that presided over Mike Flynn for some time there. And for whatever reason, I don't know what happened, but he got pulled from our case. We were never really told exactly why. I ended up with Judge Bates and went through trial. And that's where I realized when we were in D.C. that I've never been more disgusted as an American citizen. And I mean, I would even say I was disgusted just as a human being to see what jury selection looked like in Washington, D.C. Wow. And to hear the level of bias from the people in D.C. and the hatred that they have, not only for President Trump, but for each of us for supporting him. And it was then I realized, we really don't have a chance. And there was people that got struck from the jury selection, within seconds because they were so hard and harsh towards, any Trump supporter, forgetting that so the judge would ask them, did you have any opinions formed on what happened in the 2020 election? Yes, it was fair. There was no stolen election. Do you have any opinions formed on January 6th? Yeah, it was the worst day in American history. And I'm telling you, not just one, all of them felt that way. Forgetting the year before, their city was nearly burnt to the ground in 2020, looted, windows smashed, people being threatened. That wasn't scary for them, but January 6th was the worst day in American history.
Wow.
Then they were asked, could you put that bias aside and judge these men based on what they did that day? Your Honor, I couldn't do it. I don't think I could do it. You don't think you could do it? No, I don't think I could do it. It'd be very hard for me. Are you sure you couldn't do it? Could you, could you sure? And no, I just don't. It'd just be too hard for me, Your Honor. Well, could you at least try? He asked them. Could you at least try? You know what? I can try. Yeah, I can try. Okay. And there's your juror. And that happened.
Of your peers.
Exactly, of my peers. But that was how it was every single one of them. And so from that point going on to, sitting through the trial, they brought in Mike. This is how much the government spent on this. Think about it. They brought in Mike Pence's head of security, Secret Service, and that was a woman. I don't remember her name. They brought in a Capitol Police officer that, when questioned by our attorneys in cross-examination, and asked her, did these men violently enter the building that day after watching the video? Because they made them watch all the, you talk about falling asleep. Did these men? No, sir. Did you see these men, interact or be disruptive or disorderly in any way? No, sir. Did you see these men, picketing or parading? No, sir. Did you see these men, chanting or anything like that? No. In fact, you know what? They looked like they were just milling around. I mean, this was the government's witness.
Wow.
But it didn't matter to the and her response, though, was when she realized, oh no, I just pretty much said they didn't do anything but walk in and walk out. She said, what? It's January 6th. And, it was different because, and then they brought in another gentleman who was a metropolitan police officer, actually seemed like a really good guy. And he had I think I want to say it was an M4. I don't quote me on that, but he had a gun outside standing on the opposite side of the building that we were on and was called to come inside. And so the reason they had him because he was in one of the body cam, we were in one of his body cam shots. Anyway, he was asked, was January 6th more, because he said we deal with protests almost, multiple times a month, if not more. And he said, well, would you, our attorney said, would you consider it a violent protest? He said, it was more on the mild side. He said there was some that were upset, but for the most part, people were saying, we support you. We appreciate you. Mm-hmm. This is the government's witness who, by the way, when called to come inside, put his lethal weapon away and went in. So it must not have been so bad for him to put his weapon away in his vehicle.
That's right.
And so anyway, we went through that. We were convicted within an hour, and it backed up to lunch. So I think within 30 minutes, the jury had decided guilty on all 4 counts.
Wow.
So we, and the judge's words were, although these men, when reading his final statements, didn't do what they were convicted of today, by being there, we contributed as a drip in the flood. So he set the precedent that if you were in a place where a crime happens, that you yourself are guilty of that crime. And it's a shame because, this is supposed to be one of the highest courts in our country.
Yeah.
And anyway, so then we went home and we had to come back. They set a date for us to come back, which was October. So that was last July. Then we had to go back in October for sentencing. Went through all that. He gave us sentenced us to 10 days in federal prison, all misdemeanors.
Or a misdemeanor.
Only misdemeanors, which they're not supposed to. Supposedly, according to the guards in the prison that I went to in Texarkana, Texas, said you're not even supposed to be in here without a felony charge.
That's right.
I don't know. I don't know the law that well to know if that's true or not, but I just know that's what they told me. And every single guard, to be honest about it, apologized to me for the most part. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it. And some of the men actually, while I was in the prison, so we were sentenced in 2 weeks. We were sentenced to the prison. My dad was in Florida. I was out here in Texarkana, Texas, which was like a 4.5 hour drive for my wife to have to drive me down there. And anyway, when going and dealing with all that, everybody in there first thought I was an informant. They thought there's no way, no one had heard of a 10-day sentence.
Wow.
And one of the guards laughed and said, you're not the shortest one to ever come through here, but you're close. And they even nicknamed me. Everybody's got a nickname in prison. They nicknamed me Short Time because I was in there for a short amount of time. And I tell everybody this, and I'll stand by it because it's the truth. When I was in there, everyone in that prison is for Donald Trump. I don't care what their race, what their belief. And there's one reason why. They've all been through the system. They know it's corrupt. They know it's broken. And they see that this is the one man that's fighting against all this. So they're for him, just based on that alone. And, being in that prison, I learned how awful and how broken our prison system is. The food they were feeding these men is it is like the eggs smelled like mold and, raw, like rotten eggs because they are rotten. And they would feed them food that's not days, weeks, or months expired. It's years expired. And there's roaches infested on the water filtration system. The only one, by the way, that you can get water out of in the cafeteria. And on I could go about some of the things that I've witnessed within the prison system. But as far as January 6th, we also were sentenced to 2 years probation. So we are on dealing with that right now currently every time. So today's the first of the month. I have to go on and fill out my report. You have to go on there, tell them how much money's in your bank account. If you made a purchase of over $500 for the month, you have to let them know about that. We have a $3,500 fine as well, $3,000 fine because we raised funds to be able to afford an attorney. So we were punished for that. And the judge said, because the government wanted us to have to pay fines of, I think it was $15,000 or more. And matter of fact, the government asked for 9 months for me and 7 months for each, my dad and the other gentleman. And the reason that they asked 9 for me was on account of the fact that I went on podcasts from the time that they came to my door. And I got to give the judge credit. It was kind of unheard of, because mostly, and this is the truth, in regards to January 6th, most of them were judged based on not so much what they did, but what they said. And and this is kind of what happened. Now what I've learned and my experiences, this is what they did to to blacks back in the 60s during the civil rights movement. I was just completely unaware of it, but this is it. I mean, they persecuted them based on their belief, and it was that alone. And it's sad. And a lot of January 6th families have now woken up to the fact that our prison systems are broken, and that they are not, what they do, what goes on in there with visitation, calling, all that stuff. It's just all terrible. But so we got a $3,000 fine, $500 restitution for a building, by the way, that we didn't touch other than walk. And, it's a sad situation. And thankfully, I say maybe it was God, whatever, but I do know this, that judge seemed more fair than most of these other judges, because there's people with the exact same charges. So there's no precedent, but there's people with the exact same charges that I have that literally I've gotten a year in prison.
Wow. That's amazing, Casey. They convicted you because you were there, just there.
That's right.
And so why didn't they convict the others that were there, as far as like anybody in the room, police officers, those that serve in that building in any capacity, the janitor? I'm sure that he was in the building somewhere. Right. And it doesn't make sense. This is a all-out attack on the freedoms of our nation to try to set some precedent on being able to do this in the future in ways that strap the American people and allow them to take this nation over. You became part of their agenda to take America into a direction she was never birthed to go into. And I see this as a hostile takeover. It's part of the coup. It's part of what they've set out to do. And if it has to be innocent people suffer for them to get their agenda done, that's what they're doing. And it's very disturbing. My opinion, the church needs to hear more about this. Many in the church, their ears are closed.
That's right.
Many in the pulpit, they don't want to touch it. They don't want to talk about it. It upsets their sermons about 7 ways to be a better you. And in the old days, there's this group called the Black Robe Regiment. I'm sure you've heard of them. Yeah. That are credited by King George for the Revolutionary War. Right. And they were the only ones that had hits put out on them. Assassination hits put out on them. My electricity just went out, so I'm sitting in the dark. Maybe it'll come back over here in just a minute. But we'll do this from the dark. Because this is so very, very important.
Just to say this onto what you just said about the Black Robe Regiment, isn't it funny now how we hear that church politics doesn't belong in church? Well, thank God for those guys, because that's the only place they could meet was in the church to speak about the fact that they were being taken over by the British.
That's right. That's exactly right. So I got a little bit of light here. I don't know what's going on outside. Because we're just recording this. So my thing is, Casey, that my prayer is that the pulpits, those who fill pulpits across this America, whatever fivefold gift they are, that they would begin to grow backbones.
Amen.
And strengthen their knees and square their shoulders to a place to where they are speaking about these things. This Black Robe Regiment, they talked about what was going on in that day, in that time.
That's right.
And then they, maybe we won't get too much trouble for this, but one of the ministers would lay his pistols on his pulpit and preach, put them back in his holsters, and lead his congregation out into battle, the men. Another one would preach and take off his clerical robe, and there'd be a Continental Army uniform under that. Now, I'm not advocating violence in any way.
Right.
But we've got to have men and women of God that has a strong enough constitution and grit in their gut to be able to address these things. Your story needs to be heard. It needs to be heard by every minister and every congregation, because I think, Casey, you can speak to this, but I think this is a missing link in the rising up in a peaceful way and letting our voice be heard in the church. Is many people don't know about you guys. I'm appalled at how much of the church does not know what you just told me. And they think the January 6th thing is done. It's over with. Everybody's gone home. Everybody's out of jail, and many people believe y'all didn't even go to jail. But there are people still in jail right now, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep. That is true. And they just arrested somebody today in Florida, in Palm Harbor, Florida. Somebody else just got arrested today for January 6th.
That's amazing.
And another thing that people don't know is as well, there we go.
The lights came back.
Let there be light.
Let there be light.
So another thing that people don't understand is I had a small business that I had just started. I lost it because they did local hit pieces on us on the local news. I had to go through all of my life savings during that time because not many people wanted to hire or have anything to do with a January 6er because what they saw on TV and I can tell you the corporate world definitely didn't want anything. And I can tell you that people that I know that lost were able to use Venmo or GiveSend. The only one that would allow donations was Give, Send, Go, but there was GoFundMe, all these other ones that people lost their car insurance. People lost their job. When they went to trial, they were found guilty. By the time they got home, they were fired from their job. I mean, it just goes on. And it is political persecution. And I tell everyone this, and this is what the church needs to wake up to. You're next. This is all what they're doing to J6ers. Go look at it because that's what they want to do to you. And I said before, it's mostly what they've held people accountable for is what they said. So guess what that's going to lead to? Well, the Bible is eventually going to become hate speech. And if you use it or you say it, we're coming to your house next and we're going to knock on your door. And so it is time. I mean, the evangelical Christians in our country are the largest group of any group out there. Right. And I think the statistic is something like 40% vote in a presidential election. And it's like, do you people not realize, look what they did during COVID. They wanted to shut your mouth, shut the doors down. And this is what they want to do now too. And if we don't have somebody in office that is for the First Amendment, I mean, you don't even have a country at that point. And there was a reason that they made that the First Amendment, because it was the most important. And what was the Second Amendment was to protect the First Amendment.
That's right.
So these people are doing everything they can to come at us. And it's not about political, so I heard somebody in church the other Sunday say, we got to still reach across the aisle. And I wanted to go to, and I didn't butt in, but I wanted to say, sir, there is no other side of the aisle. All the politicians are on one side, and then there's us, the people, on the other. And they've abandoned all of us. And you see it with all these promises. All the J6 videos are going to be released. The new speaker, he's supposed to be a Christian, and they don't do any of it. In fact, he said he wasn't going to do any more of these omnibus bills and all that. Not only did he do it, he has money in there supporting the transgender movement. He has money in there, by the way, none for our border, but for Jordan's border and for Ukraine and for all these other countries. And here we are paying, $5 a gallon in some places and $7 in California for gas. Milk's gone through the roof, eggs. People can't, afford to live. And this is what we're doing, giving all of our money to the rest of the world. I mean, this is crazy. I don't see how anybody couldn't be for somebody that wants to be for you first. America first means you first, us
That's
first.
Right.
That's like having a family and taking care of everybody else's family, and your family goes homeless.
That's right.
This is what's going on.
It's the intimidation factor that the government is bringing down the pike to the American people, because not only are the Christian community at large the largest voting bloc, but the American citizen is the largest group of gun owners in the nation. And they want our guns. They want our speech. They want our religion, and they want our guns.
Even though I don't have a felony, we had to turn in our gun. I have a gun. I had to get rid of it. Even though I do not have a felony, didn't have any felony charges, they took them immediately. The other guy who had to give up a bunch of his guns, he had quite a few.
That's wrong. I mean, that's unconstitutional.
Exactly.
And if the American people doesn't realize this, we're in more deep doo-doo than what we know we're in.
That's right.
And this is something we've got to wake up. I'm going to take a break right here. We've been at this about 35 minutes. I want to say thank you to Casey. We're going to come back in another podcast, and we're going to pick this right up. Don't go away. Watch for this next podcast. You will not want to miss it.